Welcome, everyone. This is the second installment in the Wyatt Studio Lecture Series, and I'm not Graham Wyatt. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here, traveling, of course, on business, but I'm here in his stead, and also I'm here because I had a hand in developing these two projects that we're going to discuss today. And surprise, I guess, to you if the title didn't give it away, we're here to talk about business schools, in particular two business schools that both Kaveri, Singh and Chris Heim are going to present today. They're two schools in the Midwest. One is the L. William Seidman College of Business at Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that Kaveri will present, and the other is the Steyer Center for Executive Education at the University of Notre Dame, of course, Notre Dame in Indiana, South Bend, that Chris Heim will present. And ironically, both projects were neck and neck and were completed in 2013. And ironically, they're also located about a 2-hour drive from each other. So when Kaveri and I were doing site visits, we got to drive from one to the other all in a single day.
And also, ironically, Melissa Del Vecchio worked on both of them, but she's on vacation.
That's right. So the business school. So to talk about the business school, at least in the U.S., is to say that the first business school in the U.S. was in 1881. It's the Wharton School, I guess that's not a surprise, at the University of Pennsylvania. And it was founded by the American industrialist Joseph Wharton, who was a co-founder of Bethlehem Steel. And it still exists. It's on campus. It originally was the medical school back in 1873, and it was converted or reused for the business school in 1881. I'd like to discuss briefly what goes into a business school, the basic program of it. And I'd say there's probably more than four main categories. One is learning environments, the classrooms themselves. The other is gathering spaces, social spaces. The other is offices, of course, for faculty and staff and others. And building services, which we won't get into today. Let's start with learning environments. Learning environments then, meaning, let's say, 1881, when Wharton School was established, until fairly recently, were primarily passive environments. That is to say, it was an auditorium-style lecture hall with a lecturer or teacher sitting at the front. I gather from this picture that this probably isn't a business school. It looks more like a chemistry lab, but at any rate, it was pretty much the same for quite a while. Over the years, many different types of classrooms have been used and experimented with. This is just a sampling of a classroom diagram library we've created here in the office. Almost all of these are taken from real buildings and projects we've built over the many years. And you can see that some of them vary from standard horseshoe-shaped case classroom to a very odd sort of classroom in the round. That was a one-off we did many years ago for the Farmer School of Business in Ohio.
A version of which was adopted by Norman Foster for the School of Management at Yale.
That's right. Yep. We should get a copyright on that.
Good luck.
Yeah. The most basic classroom is the case classroom, which you see a couple of examples here that we've done. It's a sort of standard teaching space, and the case studies, probably most of you know, are sort of what-if scenarios that are presented by the teacher and then talked through and creating a sort of real-life situation or problem solving within the classroom itself. The typical configuration is very basic. You have a front wall which has whiteboards or blackboards and a large monitor or projection screen, a professor's podium. He's usually at the front, although professors these days like to move about their students in the classroom. And the students are arranged in a horseshoe shape with fixed tables and movable chairs on tiers so they can see above each other's heads. towards the front of the room, but also can see above each other's heads to actually have a personal dialogue with people that are across the room. That's the most important thing as far as a case study classroom goes. We also developed, actually, I think Graham worked on developing this, what we call the cluster classroom, which is a derivative of the case classroom and really allows people to sort of break out into smaller groups of 4 to 5 to do collaborative work during class. So you can see that here in both views, sort of before and after they turn around. Well, it's a little hard to see. Another component or classroom is the trading lab, which is essentially a moot trading floor in a way, and sort of seeks to emulate the mechanics of stock trading in real time to the students. To go on to another category, the gathering spaces, many buildings that we've done have atria within them, primarily large living rooms, which really form the heart of the business school, where students and faculty and visitors can hang out, relax, study, come together as needed. Also multi-purpose rooms, which function just as they say. In many cases, the multi-purpose rooms are divisible into 2 or 3 individual spaces with wall dividers that come down from the ceiling or from the walls, so that one could have a dinner event in one side and perhaps a classroom event on the other side, or combine them all for one large event. And dining spaces, most important perhaps in a business school which operates almost 24 hours a day, is having food of some sort, whether it's in a full-fledged dining hall within the building or a small cafe or a grab and go. And here you see one example, which also has an outdoor dining space that we had done for the Mason School of Business at William & Mary. And last but not least are offices for the faculty, and perhaps on projects we've worked on, this occupies the most of our time. Faculty are very demanding about their space. They want as much space as possible so they can hide their library in their office. Here's just a basic slide to tell you that we've done a lot of business schools over the years. We've worked on 26 campuses across the country and counting. We're working on several right now. And I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kaveri to talk about Seidman College.
So I'm going to present the Seidman College of Business at Grand Valley State in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Our team was headed by Bob Stern, Graham Wyatt, and Preston, with a varied cast of characters that followed. And our project began in 2009 when the contract was awarded in December. Design lasted for close to 2 years, and our construction duration was about the same. The building opened in May 2013 to house some summer programs and was dedicated finally in October 2013, formally. And as we just showed, RAMSA does have varied experience with business schools across the country. Grand Valley State is located in Michigan in the southern corner here, very close to the University of Notre Dame. Our building has a total gross square footage of 124,000 feet, divided into all of the programmatic elements that one might expect to find in a business school. We were very efficient in our programming, resulting in a net to gross area ratio of close to 60%. The typical for business school is closer to 54%. So we had a lot of program to fit in, and we were very efficient in our means of doing so. The project budget and our control of it was also very efficient. We were tasked with about $29.6 million to spend, which, although it may seem like a lot, was actually not much for a building of this size. And we actually with a lot of pressure from the client, we're able to come pretty close to meeting it with a cost per square foot of $245 a square foot, which is, for a business school of this type, about $100 less a square foot than what you might expect. Needless to say, it does not show in the building, and I hope that comes through in the images. So our site is located here in downtown Grand Rapids. The campus is actually divided by Highway 131. So although it is located in downtown Grand Rapids, there is one side of the campus which is here, and the other side which is here. We'll talk more about that. Our site is on this somewhat industrial corner with this existing A&P warehouse on it, and this slightly unfortunate location near the highway. That's what made it interesting. But to tell a little bit of the backstory of the project, our story, it was not by pure accident that we ended up in Grand Rapids. Our story really begins with some prior work that we had done at the Ford School for Public Policy at the University of Michigan. And this is a project that RAMSA completed in 2006. The Ford School is dedicated to the life and the legacy and the work of Gerald R. Ford, the former president of the United States, who's now deceased. Through our association with that project, we actually succeeded in winning more work at the University of Michigan with the completion of the North Quad dormitory complex. But this project actually was another result of that success. We made the acquaintance of David Fry, who's this gentleman here. He's a major donor from Grand Rapids and a trustee at Grand Valley State, and a close friend of the Ford family, who invited us eventually to compete for this building, and was also somewhat involved in the development of Grand Valley State, of the Seidman College of Business, I should say. For anybody unfamiliar with the city of Grand Rapids, there are a few large companies that you might know that might provide a reason to visit. Steelcase and Herman Miller are the two that often might cause us to venture by. Amway stands for the American Way. It's a corporation that was founded in 1959, and I would say 20 years ago it was a popular name in every American household, although we may be less familiar with it today. It's really known for its marketing of household goods, often at a very grassroots level. Under one's breath, one might quietly say pyramid scheme, or one might think of the Avon Cosmetics Company. All of those might point to the way in which Amway has chosen to spread itself, but regardless, its owners have amassed great wealth through the years, and they are Jay Van Andel and Richard DeVos, who are shown here. They met in high school, and they were good friends ever since. They formed this company. They are from Grand Rapids, and their names are on virtually every building in the downtown, which is why I mention them. Not unsurprisingly, they were the major donors for this project as well. Van Andel is now deceased. The DeVos family did some of the major donorship. The building is named for L. William Seidman, or Bill Seidman as he's known, who was also a lifelong friend of Van Andel and DeVos. He was recently deceased in 2009 when the project was conceived, and so it is for him and in his memory that the building is named. He was a founder of Grand Valley State, but is noted for his own lifelong accomplishments. He was a former head of the FDIC and a significant figure in the resolution of the savings and loans crisis in the late 80s, as well as a trusted economic advisor over 3 presidential administrations. So now, without further ado, to get into the building itself. I mentioned that our building is located in downtown Grand Rapids. The campus that our building is located on is actually a satellite of the main Grand Valley State campus, which is located in Allendale, Michigan. The main campus is healthy in its student body. It has a total enrollment of 24,500 students stretched over a wide campus established in 1960, but the Pew campus, where our building is located, is actually still very much in its development. By comparison, it only houses 370 permanent students. Was established in 1988, has this unfortunate relationship with the highway, and we'll go into a little more detail here. There is a small quadrangle of engineering buildings clustered together, which are a little bit remote from the rest of the campus. Again, not unsurprisingly, the main building which forms a presence on campus is named for the DeVos family. There are a few dormitories, a cluster of administration buildings, and little to tie this all together in a master plan. That's not to say that we didn't try to propose a master plan. We did. We didn't get very far, but eventually there will be an architect who comes along and is successful in tying some of this together. Nonetheless, our building endeavored to really create a relationship with the existing business school and to create a presence for the campus visible from the highway, from downtown, which is here, and from the river overall. These are some of the buildings which exist on campus, and to reinforce my point, there is a lack of a coherent architectural style to bind them. There are a few examples of postmodern Baroque, or some attempt at it, and then there is everything else, which is nondescript and built really over the last, well, over a period of, say, 9 years, from 98 to 2007, by a multiplicity of architects. Our site in the remote corner where it's located is somewhat industrial, but the most significant thing that we found when we visited initially were the views to the river and the views to the downtown, which our design really seeks to capitalize on. So, in truth, since there was not much to draw from in the immediate surrounding context of the campus, and not too much of a campus identity from which to develop design intent, we looked to the historical heritage of the city. And these images are those of the Meyer May House, a Frank Lloyd Wright building, which exists in Heritage Hill just to the south of the campus. They are prominent examples of the prairie style, which is dominant in the Midwest. The Meyer May House was designed in 1909, or built in 1909 at the height of the prairie style, and embodies many of the typical details that one might find for a building of that style in that character, the broad overhanging eaves, the buff brick, the stepped massing, the invitation of the exterior to the interior spaces, and lots of light and airiness overall. Light wood finishes and so forth. And all of these things are characteristics that you might find in some of the images of the interior spaces that we will show as well. And it should also be mentioned that Grand Rapids has a significant Dutch heritage as well. In the 1850s, there were a number of Dutch settlers fleeing religious persecution. Cohorts or followers of this Dutch Reformed minister who settled in Grand Rapids and in the areas surrounding. One such town just to the south of Grand Rapids is the town of Holland, Michigan, which is unabashed in its connection to its origins, in its growing of tulips. And it's said that they actually export tulips to the Netherlands today. So, drawing from that history, some of the precedents that we looked at were both Dutch and early modern. And we looked at Dudok and Bauma, who are a little more industrial in their language, also in keeping with the location of our site. utilizing some simple massing and stripped down forms. But we also looked at the local Michigan context and the early modern heritage of that one might find there, with Saarinen's Cranbrook Academy just to the east in Bloomfield Hills, particularly looking at the Kingswood School, again, which utilizes buff brick and stepped forms and overhanging eaves, and a lot of the same motifs that we were finding in the Frank Lloyd Wright house that I showed. And so this ultimately was the interview proposal that we put together, utilizing a lot of those same motifs. This is the view from the campus, and one significant element is this tower element, which would be illuminated at night, would serve as a beacon from the highway to create a presence of the university for people passing by, driving by, and to really put it on the map of downtown Grand Rapids. So following that interview proposal, we went through just a few iterations. We studied the massing again and finalized an S-shaped plan characterized by 2 courtyards to allow a lot of natural light to enter our very tightly programmed spaces, finally resulting in a big thumbs up by Bob Stern at the end of the process. And so this was really where we started, with an empty site and an industrial building on the side of the highway, sparsely located campus. And this is where we ended, with a building that has a presence, both from the highway, a relationship to the surrounding campus, and an identity really of its own, with river views and an interaction between outside and inside, anchored really by this tall tower here in the center. Here's the view from the southeast. You can see this is downtown Grand Rapids, and all of these buildings with river views we knew would be looking back at us. So this is an important elevation, although it faces really the back of the campus. There's a courtyard here that is south-facing, that will be a pleasant place for students to gather in the summer or in the warmer months. Michigan is known for its cold temperatures, but when the weather is warm, this is a pleasant gathering place for students, a courtyard that will create an identity of the school apart, perhaps, or the building apart, perhaps, from the rest of the campus. And this is the view as designed from the southeast, from the approach from the existing business school as you walk up, with a main arch providing a welcoming motif for students on the approach. Now to talk a little bit about the internal or the interior organization of the building. This is a stacking diagram showing really that on the ground floor we had the majority of our public spaces, the main multi-purpose room that Preston mentioned is often an anchor for business school institutions. We've got a student lounge here and a main informal gathering space and a lobby. Our second floor is mostly academic spaces. The third floor is offices. The fourth floor is largely mechanical, but there is this boardroom up in the tower providing great views to downtown. And so to get into the ground floor, the main entrance from the campus is here. This is where the arched entry is that we saw in the rendering. There's a parking lot on this side, so it was recognized that there would be students entering through the parking lot, but we didn't want to encourage this. We provided the entry for them. And this is the entry through the courtyard on the river. The river is here. The organization of the plan on every level contains a very clear axial circulation, punctuated by staircases, vertical circulation elements that allow for easy movement up and down. On the ground floor, in addition to the public spaces that I mentioned, there is a cafe that allows for circulation to the main exchange area. This is a casual area where students can gather, eat, play, and what have you. The business school interacts very significantly with the community, so we were asked to incorporate these large community outreach centers where people can come and discuss business plans that they are developing. On the second floor, in addition to a variety of classroom types and breakout spaces, we have a terrace, which is a nice outdoor amenity, again, allowing the outside to come in. On the third floor, there's the dean's space, and here we stacked up all of the offices for all of the different faculty members. There is also a faculty lounge here with views to the city. And finally, on the fourth floor, there's the boardroom. Some images of construction. We actually had to add a lot of fill to the site here to raise the grade. This saved us when there was a major flood that occurred in April 2012, right before the building was complete. Not a drop of water permeated in. That was followed by steel erection, the building enclosure. This is spray foam, which is being applied nice and orange like Swiss cheese for a long time. And then finally, the brick on the outside and the completion of the interior. And some images of the completed building, an aerial view, an image of the approach from the campus, the tower at night and the view from the highway. We were asked to put up this bright blue sign. This is what you see when you drive by, but you cannot miss the building as a result. The view from the river, which is quite poetic at sunset. And the main sun-filled courtyard, an opportunity for students to gather and play. The lobby as you enter with this main staircase that provides a place for students to meet each other and circulate through. The lobby is named for the Fry Foundation, again, not unsurprising. The exchange, the multi-purpose room with a dividing wall to allow for eating and lecturing on either side. The main gallery space, which is double height, with light fixtures that were semi-custom despite the budget that we designed for the building, and a palette of light wood and granite on the interior. These railings also were custom for the project. And then finally, the boardroom with the clear views to downtown. Again, the approach. And with that, I'll turn this over to Chris.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Heim. I'm a senior associate, and I'm a designer in the Wyatt Studio, and I'll be presenting the Steyer Center for Executive Education at the University of Notre Dame, part of the Mendoza College of Business. Let's begin with credit to our team. The upper middle column lists the core RAMSA team members, and the 5 bottom rows are people who pitched in one phase or another along the way. Tonight we thank them all. Project came into our office in the fall of 2008, which is not as long ago as it sounds, as an RFP, followed by an interview. After we were awarded the project, we agreed on the schedule to kick off in January of 2009 and finish our design work 2 years later, with the building's opening then slated for the spring of 2013. The project was finished on time and the owner took occupancy in April, but the official opening was not held until late September. Like many things at Notre Dame, it was timed to coincide with a big college football game. In this case, it was the Oklahoma game, which as it so happens did not end well for the Irish. Football, for better or worse, is a major shaper of the school's identity and campus life, and we'll get more into that later in the show. For those of you who do not know, Notre Dame is located in north central Indiana. It is 84 miles east of Chicago and 110 miles south of Grand Valley, where we just were with Kaveri. Now for some school history. The university was founded in 1842 by Father Edward Sorin of the Brothers of the Holy Cross, who had traveled west by wagon train with the goal of opening an agriculture school. Legend holds that they were planning to make it all the way out to California, but had gotten themselves stuck in the Indiana snow and had to stop where they were and simply make a go of it. In truth, they had accepted an offer from an Indiana bishop for a large parcel of land adjacent to the postal road. The land was given to them on the condition that they open their school within 2 years of arrival. In the 20th century, you want to say it again? But we've moved this presentation like 6 times. I've had a lot of time to play with the PowerPoint. In the 20th century, ND gained national fame through their success on the football field, led by famous coaches such as Knute Rockne, Frank Leahy, and Ira Persegian. Their exploits both on and off the field have been the subject of Hollywood movies, most notably the 2 shown here, which loosely form Football the Movie Parts 1 and 2. It was Father Theodore Hesburgh who, during his presidency in the latter half of the 20th century, reshaped Notre Dame as a leading academic institution. He is seen here as the second man from the left, linking arms with Dr. King and others at a civil rights protest in Chicago. Among his many accomplishments, Father Ted oversaw the university's transition to coeducation in 1972, as well as exponential growth in enrollment, endowment, and research. He served as advisor to every president since Eisenhower. In his lifetime, he received 150 honorary degrees, the most ever awarded to one person, along with both the Congressional Gold Medal and the Presidential Medal of Freedom, in recognition of his pioneering efforts to advance civil rights. Now onto the campus. Here's a recent aerial tilt-shift photograph, which is all the rage. The main building with its famous golden dome is in center right, adjacent to the spired basilica, and both buildings preside over what is affectionately known as God Quad. South Quad is in the upper left of the image, and North Quad is in the foreground. The university's leadership describes its campus as a wooded green, with a handful of buildings tucked in here and there. The architecture on campus loosely breaks down into 3 distinct eras, which I'll now describe. The first era runs from the school's founding up until 1950 and formed what's referred to today as the historic core. Here you see a fairly diverse range of architectural style, detail, and material colors. Some stone buildings, some red brick, some light brown brick, and then the yellow gold bricks used for the dome and the basilica and a few other buildings were actually made from clay pulled from the adjacent lake beds. The second era begins in 1950 when the Minneapolis-based firm Ellerbe Beckett won a competition to design O'Shaughnessy Hall, a general classroom building. Ellerbe Beckett went on to design almost every new building on campus over the next half-century. These buildings are mostly flat-roof boxes with a smattering of perfunctory collegiate Gothic details here and there. Moreover, Ellerbe Beckett instituted a new uniform material palette of brick in a very uninteresting shade of beige. Ellerbe Beckett were eventually shown the door in 1997 over significant oversights made during the renovation expansion of the football stadium, including inadequate accessible seating locations and field drainage problems which persist to this day. At the same time as Ellerbe Beckett's departure, ND also cleaned house in the University Architect's office, bringing in a new team charged with establishing a campus-wide brand of collegiate Gothic buildings informed by the historic core. And so it came to be that Ellerbe Beckett was replaced by the SLAM Collaborative, starting with the new bookstore and ex-visitor center, which opened together in 1997. SLAM's buildings have attempted to take more direct architectural cues from the historic core with varying degrees of success and failure. Most unfortunately, though, the beige brick palette of the previous era somehow carried forward into these new buildings like an uninteresting virus and is now the unwavering campus standard. ND is still living in the SLAM era, now reaching its zenith in the utter insanity known as the Campus Crossroads Project, seen here in the bottom middle panel, which effectively bolts 3 new, unrelated academic buildings to the front and sides of the football stadium, a decision one could cynically assume is a justification for adding luxury boxes. Moving on from that, here is our site, highlighted in gold. At the time of the interview, it was a faculty parking lot. The site is adjacent to the existing Mendoza College of Business, which along with our site runs down the eastern side of what's unofficially known as the Bartolo Quad. Here once again is God Quad in the historic core, where the main building is located. As you can see, our site is fairly remote from the historic center. However, the university is expanding aggressively, not in enrollment, but rather in facilities. They have spent the last several decades assembling parcels to the east and south of the core. They are now following a master plan prepared by Air St. Gross, and as part of that plan, the area highlighted in light green is designated for future development, whereas the area to the northwest corner is considered off limits, both to preserve the character of the historic core and to avoid floodplain issues associated with these two lakes. As Notre Dame is primarily a pedestrian campus, this expansion shifts the geographic center from the dome over to the football stadium, and thus making our site more centrally located. And perhaps this is the less cynical justification for bolting on those 3 new buildings to the stadium. I'll let others decide. Also, as part of this master plan, the primary route of vehicular traffic on campus now starts at the intersection of Angela Boulevard and Eddy Street, which places our building at a prominent visual gateway point. And just to prove that the university is making good on its ambitions for growth to the south and east, what's on the screen now are real construction projects fully paid for between the years 2010 and 2020, part of an estimated $840 million of expenditure, all fully funded by donors. Speaking of donors, our lead donor was Ralph Steyer, the CEO and chairman of Johnsonville Brats. Yeah, let that sink in. A family-owned company founded by his father. It was Ralph who took the Wisconsin-based brand national, and as his billboard says, they are now served in finer parking lots everywhere. Below that billboard is a photo of a typical afternoon football tailgate at Notre Dame. No doubt much of the smoke rising is coming from Johnsonville Brats. In May of 2008, Ralph approached the school with a $25 million gift to fund a new executive education center on campus. Exec Ed has been offered at Notre Dame since the mid-'80s, but in 2002, the school made a strategic decision to relocate the program to downtown Chicago in order to compete head-to-head with the University of Chicago and Northwestern in attracting executive students. Notre Dame purchased the Railway Exchange Building, also known as the Santa Fe Building because of the sign, which is now a Motorola sign, on Michigan Avenue in the Loop to house the program on 2 lower floors, and it leased out the rest of the building to tenants. Even with this relocation, though, the Exec Ed program maintained a presence back on campus for key lectures and events. Unfortunately, that presence was maintained largely in a single windowless multi-function classroom in the basement of Mendoza College. I know I picked a mean photo, but you get the idea. Hence, the program had pressing need for a new campus facility to call their own. Just to run through the programs, Exec Ed is offered in 4 types at this school. There's the EMBA, which is quite similar to traditional MBA, but built around the schedule of students who continue to work full-time. There's the Executive Integral Leadership Program, which is sort of their marquee certificate program. Actually, funnily enough, my brother Jim just completed this program about a month ago at Steyer Center. And he's not an architect, but he did say our building looked really neat, which was good. The other types are open enrollment certificates, which the EIL is one of those. Those are offered throughout the year on different topics of business and leadership. And then there's also custom certificate programs for corporate. This would be a big company sends some 20 of their executives for workshops together. Okay, so here's the interview, or the program they provided at the interview. Based on our experience with other business schools, we applied a net to gross ratio for this building of 57%, which yielded 62,300 gross square feet for the building. However, their stated construction budget was $19 million, assuming a fairly typical cost per square foot for their geographic area and building type. It became clear to us that they were not going to be able to fit all the program they were seeking while staying within their budget. This meant that we were heading to budget challenges before we even lifted our pencils. I pulled this slide right from the interview presentation. As many as you know, a good number of your colleagues here at RAMSA came from Notre Dame School of Architecture, myself included. Pictured here are the ND RAMSA employees that were scampering about the office in 2008. included this slide in our presentation to reassure Notre Dame that we had some understanding of their unique culture. Here's a few more slides right from the interview. At that time, we were excited that the building would sit on a prominent quadrangle site with an unobstructed view corridor back to the heart of campus. The client's stated goal was that the building occupants feel like they're getting a Notre Dame campus experience despite being largely isolated from the main population. In order to establish a connection, we suggested that they situate the building's primary social space in a spot that would take best advantage of the view of the dome. The photo on the bottom half of the slide, incidentally, was taken by Graham just shortly before the interview. Another novel suggestion we made during the interview was to preserve as much of the open site as possible in order to allow for expansion and added density over time. As you can see here in the middle left photo, this happens to be Hesburgh Center, built in '87. Many of those buildings on campus sprawl out in 1 or 2 stories, situated around inward-looking outdoor spaces that tend to receive little use. Through some quick calculations and test fits with clay study models, we proved that a 3-story building could support the entire program on slightly less than half of the site they were willing to allocate for this project. Now on to design. After being awarded the project, we got to know our many clients, and each of whom had checks and balances upon the others. And both us and our clients had to present at key intervals to the Board of Trustees, which is a big fractious group with many competing interests. And all those clients set 2 very clear expectations for us before we set out, one for the exterior and one for the interior. The exterior of the building was to adhere to tight standards of materials and construction, and every little arch and buttress would be exhaustively weighed for its merits. The expectations for the interior were less. In fact, there was a stated desire to control the perceivable costs of the project, which is to say that even if a material detail was not terribly expensive, it also had to look not terribly expensive. These expectations were shaped by 2 issues. One was a sort of recency effect. The university had just completed an extensive expansion of the law school, which came in late and over budget, clocked in at 420 square feet, dollars per square foot. Quite higher than expected for this location and building type. After the law school addition, the trustees issued a clear marching orders to keep tight cost control on the interior finishes of all future work. The other issue was that our building was meant to form a mini campus with the existing Mendoza College, which already had a series of grand social gathering spaces, and as such, our social spaces for this particular project were expected to be intimately scaled. Okay, some process photos for you. A series of snapshots of our design evolution. After several months of studies, we zeroed in on a bar of massing, cozied up to Mendoza. We then progressed in our studies, as we do, from clay to paper, and from paper to laser. And by the start of the next year, we were studying the interior spaces. There's 3 different options for the lounge. Here's a snapshot of where we were at the conclusion of design development, which is not terribly dissimilar from what we wound up building, along with a possible massing strategy for that land-banked future expansion.
Clever, isn't it?
Yes, very. Glad you thought of it. Here's the final site plan. The land-banked lower portion of the site remains as faculty parking for the near future, separated from our building by an outdoor terrace. And also by sort of cozying up to Mendoza, our building encloses the existing courtyard and provides a visual backdrop to the space, creating a clearly defined mini campus for the College of Business. We have formal entrances both from the quad and from the new vehicular drop-off on Eddy Street, as well as convenience entrances for people coming and going from Mendoza, and also entrances from the parking lot and the future expansion area, which also double as the exit discharge for the upper floors. These 6 public entrances leave us with a true 4-sided building with no good spot to tuck the servicing, and so we decided to hide it in plain sight where they would least expect it, by the main door. Here's a series of renderings showing the building from an aerial perspective looking back to the historic core, and a view from the approach along Eddy Street. And then finally, a view looking southeast from the quad. Onto the interior. Interior layout is best understood from this stacking diagram. The ground floor is mostly social space. The second floor is classrooms, breakout rooms, and support space. The third floor is an additional classroom, a big open bar of office space, and the executive lounge on that corner position for the dome. Here we see a ground floor plan with its 6 main points of entry, all of which lead into a pair of twinned lobbies, which feature building directories and a reception area. The lobbies are connected by a long hall featuring 3 double height bay windows. This hall serves as the pre-function space for this multi-purpose room. On a typical day, this is divided here down the middle, and this is daily food service. This allows for a banquet configuration at special times. Around the corner from the multi-purpose room is the chapel, which actually has daily mass. It was designed to have live reflective acoustics for the benefit of both piano and choral performances. 2 large stairs and 2 elevators provide vertical circulation. Like most of our academic projects, this building was planned from the get-go to encourage regular usage of the stairs. Moving up to the second floor, the main hallway overlooks the pre-function space below. Here you can see that the 3 bay windows are separated on this level by breakout rooms, which give the sequence of space an interesting rhythm while still maintaining an intimate scale. Large classrooms occupy the bulk of the second floor, including 2 90-seat K-style classrooms, 1 smaller 35-seat tiered classroom, and a flat and flexible teaching space. Up to the third floor, we have the famous cluster-style classroom, and then the faculty offices, and then to conclude on the lounge. Okay, so building construction. Foundation started going in September of 2011. The 2 elevator shafts went up next. They double as the shear walls for the buildings. They stood naked for a while the steel went up around them. We commissioned an elaborate mock-up to test various masonry conditions and profile returns. And we were fully enclosed by, I think, near the end of 2012, and we were totally done by March. Well, April, we had to go back and paint. So on to completion. Francis Zakowski from Esto and his assistant Pavel did these photos with me about 3 weeks after the dedication. This photo is taken from, we're going to go clockwise from the south. This photo is from the Fly Tower at the adjacent DeBartolo Performing Arts Center. You can see the dome in the distance again, in the football stadium, as well as the famous mural called Touchdown Jesus on the main library. Zooming down now to the terrace, outside of the pre-function space. Around clockwise, the view from the quad. Around again onto Eddy Street, showing the enclosure of the Mendoza courtyard. And finally on the exterior, on the main entry on Eddy Street. And here, about 50 feet from the main entry, is that famous service loading dock concealed behind a roll-up oak door. And so if you didn't know it was there, you would never see it, I hope. Let's go in through those main doors into the eastern lobby, through that lobby into that pre-function space with its double height bay windows, through the pre-function space into that multi-purpose room, then around the corner to the chapel. The 5 stained glass windows are 5 saints closely associated with commerce. We do that too.
St. J.P. Morgan.
Very up to the second floor to the main classrooms. Interestingly, in the right-hand image, you see on these 2 screens a simulcast of distance learning. This left-hand image is an ongoing class at their facility in Chicago, and then this is a satellite class in Cincinnati. And then we'll conclude up in that famous executive lounge. We did a very elaborate wood roulon ceiling, which is acoustical treatment. It allows multiple conversations to go on at once. And then here is that long promised view back to the dome. There's Graham's photo from just before the interview. We were all very relieved when it worked out, 5 years later. So there we have it, from design through building construction to completion. And then finally, I want to close on this image because I feel it best captures what this building's all about. On the ground floor is the chapel, which represents the faith-based community this university is founded upon. Immediately above that, there's a heavily used education space. And immediately above that is the primary gathering and social space, where the occupants hopefully are applying everything that they've learned on the 2 floors below. Thank you very much. We normally open up for questions. Jen?
What was the budget compared to the last one?
I think the hard costs or construction costs? Or?
I guess construction of that was.
I think that the final cost was $31 million. I don't remember the budget, but it was $330 a square feet versus $430 a square feet. And they were expecting something closer to us from the get-go.
We came in just under budget, actually, at the end of construction with all the change orders and stuff.
Because we had a favorable bidding climate.
We did.
The market had collapsed. Fortunately, Notre Dame is one of the few universities that I know of that will not go forward with a project until they have all the money in hand.
That's right.
Correct.
So they had the money and could build it.
100% funded.
The contractor was Scansco. They had a somewhat local office in Michigan. And they actually went out of business, at least that branch went out of business.
Yeah.
Almost at the end of the construction of our buildings.
And then they all wound up in different Skanska offices. We're working with Randy again at University of Kentucky. Yes?
What were some of the bigger moves that y'all did to bring the cost down for the Grand Rapids project?
The roof.
Or anything that stood out? Or was it all just a lot?
We originally had a zinc roof designed, and we ended up with an asphalt shingle roof. So that was definitely one. And then on our interior materials palette, originally we had terrazzo floors. Instead, we traded those out. They were terrazzo tends to be very labor intensive to install, and that drives up the cost. We went with cheap Chinese granite instead, which was laid in smaller pieces, but we actually managed to specify 24 by 24 inch tiles, and they looked very nice and very rich ultimately. We also didn't have any stone on the interior. We had GFRG for our column covers and cased openings. And we also minimized the amount of wood paneling that we would have in the interior spaces. We had a lot of cased openings and wood trim, but by not having paneling in large areas, I think that brought down the cost as well.
Yeah, and kept the detailing simple in the paneling.
Right. On the exterior, we had brick, which was cheap. We were able to take advantage of the economic climate and use real Indiana limestone, but we did that as well in a very economic way.
And just real quickly, Stayer had the opposite experience where we had to make some substitutions to look cheaper. Like, for example, we had a slate floor designed for quite a while, and we wound up going with the terrazzo floor, which at the time was cost neutral, if not just a touch higher, and they wanted the terrazzo because people would perceive it as being cheaper. I know, right? I mean, it came out well, but it was a tough go. Paul?
Both of these were hand-laid brick, is that right?
Yes, laid up on block.
CMU block.
Yeah. Jesse, you had your, oh.
I'm just,
Well,
metal,
okay.
metal stud at GVSU.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, CMU at ND and stud at GVSU.
just out of curiosity for Stair, no, not Stair, for Grand Valley, did you consider precast? Because it seems like for the size of that.
We looked at it briefly with the construction manager, and it was determined that there wouldn't be any cost savings to do that. So we didn't.
Jesse?
Maybe the names mixed up. On Grand Valley, the kind of dental elements on the exterior under the eaves, what were those made of?
Fiberglass.
Okay.
Some wonderful materials.
Yes, yes.
Very noble material.
Designed
the
on a
idea was to
dime.
emulate stone. Or,
Yeah, ultimately, yes.
It's called gel coat. It's not paint, gel.
Right, gel coat, yes.
These are all very typical moves we make with business schools. Like the Miller Hall building at William and Mary has a lot of GFRG. You'd have to go looking for it to know it was not the real deal.
Yeah, well, especially when it's not high up.
Right.
But it's very durable, so that's the important thing.
Good.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.